Welcome to the producer panel. In Grass-Fed Exchange, this is one of the more popular panels at the meetings. And how we are going to do it today is that each one of our speakers, each one of our producers, will show a few slides and introduce themselves and their ranching environment, their enterprise, and then we'll come back and I'll kick it off with a question, and then we want to open it up to you. And if you don't have a question, I'll ask another question. But what I'm hoping is that you have lots of questions to ask these folks. As you can see, we have some diversity here, diversity in age, gender, and certainly in landscape, as well as their enterprises. So we're going to get started now, and I'm going to let John Locke be our first producer to speak.
Thank you, Deborah. My name's John Locke. I'm from about 50 miles southwest of Houston, a little town called Hungerford.
You don't have to get
and I am a sixth-generation member of the J.D. Hudgens family. I can't tell you anything about where we ranch and what we do without giving you just a little bit of family history. My great-great-great-grandfather settled our area in 1839, and if you know anything about our environment, it's a pretty miserable place, to put it bluntly. I mean, there's not a whole lot you can say about it. Rumor has it on his deathbed, they owned a place in Chapel Hill, which is much more beautiful and much more pleasant than where we are, and he told his soon-to-be widow, whatever you do, do not go back there. It's so miserable, the men have to drink too much whiskey to cope with it, and I don't want you and the family there. But what did he do? What did she do? As soon as he was in the ground and as soon as he was cold, she went straight back down to the area where we are today. So there's a lot of problems ranching in that environment. I say that whenever your mosquitoes are almost as big as your deer, it's a pretty tough place to raise cattle. And one of we come from a long line, I think, of problem solvers, and that was a problem that they needed to solve in agriculture. And the way that they decided to do it was with Bos Indicus cattle. Our family invested enough money in about 160 head of Bos Indicus cattle in the early 1920s, they could have bought 2,000 head of commercial cattle. They believed very strongly that this was a way that they could ranch and they could be successful in that environment. If you look up on the slide there, if you can see it, that's a bull named Manso. About 90% of all Brahman cattle in the world go back to that one bull. Our family traded for him in 1933, and my family, the way that we fit in is in 1963 we incorporated the ranch, and we had one of the 5 divisions then, which are now 8 divisions today. We've sold cattle to 38 states and 43 foreign countries around the world. So next slide. Whoops, let me back up. This is a little bit about our current day operation. In 2011, you all know what happened here in Texas. We had a massive drought. We had a gut check on our business. We had a big succession event that we went through. We started to look at our business differently, and we changed a whole lot. We wanted to do more with less. We had to do more with less. One of the ways that we did this, I went to the Ranching for Profit school in 2011. 2012, we started grazing. We'd never done any cell grazing before. And so this is a map of our property here. It's about 550 acres. We get about 50 inches of rainfall a year. The third picture there is about 200 Brahman cows grazing at 500,000 pounds density on some Tifton 85. So everything always doesn't go according to plan, and we have had some significant challenges. Some of those challenges you can see here. People ask me about extreme weather in our environment. Well, we've only had a 200-year flood, a 200-year drought, and a 200-year polar vortex in the span of a decade. So it's been fun. And really, when I think about it, I thank God that we had all of that happen that fast, because we learned so much from those extreme events and those challenges that we had. We've learned a lot since we started grazing and since we changed the program. I don't know if y'all can see that picture on the right. That is the only picture I have from the polar vortex. And my handwriting is not that good. I don't have any pictures of the drought, and I'm kind of thankful because I'm still trying to forget that. All right, so I thought about how I could describe to y'all very simply how we do what we do. And I thought we don't have enough names for grazing systems, right? And we've got MIG, we've got AMP, we've got cell grazing, mob grazing, all of these things. And I started to just call it JIG, John's Intensive Grazing, but that really doesn't tell you a whole lot. So I'm going to describe to you real briefly the how and what we do. So we use moderate animal density, which is, in my definition, about 30,000 to 150,000 pounds density. We use frequent animal movement, frequent 4 to 8 times a day. And then that's all in the hopes of increasing larger yields, okay? And those larger yields would be yields of forage, cattle, and money. And I got real proud. I spent a lot of time on this. I was really proud of myself for coming up with this. And if I'm amazing at two things, they are modesty and creating acronyms. And I looked at this, moderate animal density, frequent animal movement, increasing larger yields. The acronym is MAD Family. Well, I'll have to go back to the drawing board on that, but that's one of the points I want to make today. Whatever you want to do and why you want to do it, if your family's mad about it, if your quality of life's not improving, you're probably doing it wrong. And that's one of the most important lessons that I've learned in my short grazing career. So, lastly, what will our legacy be? If you ask somebody from outside our family, potentially many people inside my extended family, what our legacy is, they tell you, well, it's Brahman cattle. It's Brahman genetics, Brahmins here and there, all over the world. We've spread Brahman genetics and contributed to the beef industry. I like to think that I come from a long line of problem solvers. The Brahman cow was just a tool that they used to try to solve a problem of how to ranch in our environment. And that's what I'm working on, is how do I carry on that legacy of being a problem solver in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, I am Katie Scarborough, and I think your comment is debatable about maybe one of the hardest places to ranch, because it rains in Houston. But I grew up Oklahoma and have been in Texas some of my professional life, and I thought, it's a pretty good environment. But really now where I live, did A&M, went to TCU. Now where I live, though, man, it was the promised land where I lived in Oklahoma and Texas. So I live in Cora, Wyoming now. This is the base of our operations. On the right-hand side there, that's typical landscape. The state of Wyoming has more sagebrush acres than any other state in the United States. That picture on the left, that probably looks pretty bleak to a lot of you, but I'm pretty dang proud of that patch right there. There's something other than rocks and sagebrush in it. So that's kind of the reality of where we operate. We have about 12 inches of precip. Over half of that is actually going to come from snow, and I would very strongly debate that we actually get 12 inches. A lot of that measurement is based on water equivalent in our snowfall, but we live at 8,000 feet, it's windy, and it's cold as heck in the winter, so a lot of that actually sublimates. It doesn't even go on the ground. So I would argue we're actually probably in single digits. And in a really good year, we have 50 frost-free days. It's more like 35. That's usually what I plan on. That's it. That's the growing season. When my perennial grasses come up, within 2 weeks they grow a seed head. They're survivors. And it makes it very hard to figure out when to graze them and how much rest they actually need. So traditionally it's cow country. When I got there, I've been here 3 years, I sold all the rest of the cows. We are only stockers. And our challenge is the size of landscape that we operate in and how low the productivity is relative to the vastness of that landscape. So we're kind of, by design, we have to operate, we don't have a type. If they're purple, three-legged, whatever, if they make money, those are the kind I buy. So it kind of changes a little bit every year. And we operate on Forest Service, BLM, state and private ground. So we deal with every federal agency, every grazing plan, policy, regulation that's probably pretty near the exact opposite of maybe what we should be doing. It's Texas. There's probably no Forest Service people in the room. But anyways, that's what we operate in. The backbone of what saves us, though, we are very typical in that we are high altitude, flood irrigated mountain meadows. The bad part about that is traditional irrigation would tell you that if your hayfields look like a duck pond, as long as you can pull that water out of the stream, basically kill all the trout, pull it all out, spread it out. That's what conventionalism would tell you, and then cut a crop and never put an animal on it. That's how you would do it. So that's what I walked into. Basically, if it wasn't freezing, the ground was underwater. I mean, it's no pore space, no oxygen present. Like I found a beetle this spring, and I was so excited. I'd never seen a bug living there on that place. Like, I mean, it's cold or it's underwater. That's pretty much it. So these landscapes up here, like on the top left, we do have a lot of natural riparian corridors. So less than 20% of the ground I operate on is actually a riparian and or flood or sub-irrigated piece of ground, and it actually makes about 2.5 times the grazing capacity of what the remaining 90% does, the sagebrush. Okay, we can literally put a mob of several thousand steers in 1,000 acres, and they're in there for half a day. We're not polywiring 1,000 acres. I hate to break it to you. So this is what we do in a larger sense. Basically, the red states and California, that's everywhere I source cattle. So what we do, we buy something that's undervalued, either because it's in the wrong location, it's been mismanaged, wrong type, class, quality for the market. They all go to a lease in that black dot there in California for our Western operations. And basically we do what's called 2 seasoning cattle. We double grass them. So I buy green steers. I want to keep them green, lean, ready to go when they get to Wyoming. So they spend the fall, winter, early spring in California, and then everybody gets freighted to Wyoming. I know it sounds insane, but the one thing that Cora has going for it is excellent yearling basis. So I usually make about $60 a head on any steer I buy just when I buy them because of what I'm going to do by changing a zip code. And basically that's how we make money on these vast western landscapes. And then what I do over in Nebraska, it's kind of a little bit of the same idea, but we play the freight game, I guess, the opposite way. We buy cattle in Nebraska, which is the most expensive place you can do that. But we kind of have a little bit of a key in that we have no freight in them. They're right next to corn, they're right next to rye, they're right next to a lot of other things. And then these blue states, we're looking at contracts, or I'm working on contracts right now to expand our sourcing. So, and what I'm trying to illustrate here and show you guys is our challenges in these western landscapes is how vast they are, how regulated they are, and how much input relative to how low production. Unfortunately, as far as a management perspective, we try to be really low overhead operationally. But it takes scale to be able to affect acres at scale. And unfortunately, like, that's not going to change. That is federally managed western landscapes. Okay, am I thrilled about how much fossil fuel I burnt? I'm sure that's what a lot of you are thinking looking at this map. But no. But it's unfortunately kind of the mechanism in the model to get enough impact, to get enough hooves down on the ground, and to be able to make money doing it. Okay, cattle are expensive in Wyoming and Nebraska. We can't buy, unfortunately, locally sourced yearlings, and we can't get enough of them, to be perfectly honest, to affect enough acres. So anyways, it's pretty vast. My child is going to be 1 year old next week, and he's been to 14 states. So, world traveler.
My name's Emery Birdwell. My wife, Deborah, and I own the Birdwell and Clark Ranch in Henrietta, Texas. It's a stocker operation. We've been there 18 years. To back up a little bit, and 40 years ago, I studied under Alan Savory. I went to several of his schools and seminars, and when the question comes up what kind of grazing we do savory grazing. If it wasn't for savory, I'll say this now, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here, my wife and I wouldn't be here. And there's a chance none of these people sitting up here would be here. He's the one that started this. So I got that out in the open. I know that maybe not sit well with everybody, but that's the way we feel about him. We buy and sell around 9,000 cattle a year. We run all of them will run through that ranch at one time. 2,000 of them will go to wheat, 2,000 of them go to Kansas, and 5,000 to 6,000 of them will stay there on grass. or we'll put them in different places. More cattle go to wheat, but one way or another, what don't die, we graze. And when I say that is we do run and have run in the past high-risk cattle. That's part of our life. We're looking for better ways to do it. And we've now previously, just currently, or the last 2 years, started buying video cattle. And that may be, well, it's part of our solution, but it's not all of it. We basically also are tripling our, just what we've accomplished there in 18 years is we basically have tripled our stocking rate over our neighbors or anywhere in the area. So what we're doing is working. Some of you were there yesterday and saw what's going on. So luckily I'm up here with a bunch of good talkers. I've got a list of things I'm not supposed to say. And so I'm gonna let it sit down and let it go to the next one.
On Petiwashte, Tatea Aqualui Lakotia Imachiapi, na Kelsey Scott, Washichuye Imachiapi. Good day, everybody. My name is Kelsey Scott. My Lakota name is Soft Little Breeze Woman. I come to you today from the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation, which is in the northern mixed grass prairie, present-day South Dakota. Right there, north central along the Missouri River, what's now Lake Oahe of the Missouri River. I come from a cow-calf ranching background. I remember leaving for college to go to South Dakota State University, getting to college thinking my only path forward in a career where I could be involved with animals was to be a vet. And luckily, SDSU had hopefully they're not in the crowd, terrible chemistry teacher. And they taught me I did not like chemistry and I probably wouldn't make a very good vet, and I had to start to look elsewhere for a career that I might get to spend outside, and lo and behold, that was when I learned you could be involved in the ranching industry and make a career of it. So I came home to join my family's operation, quickly fell in love with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, which is a national nonprofit organization that serves American Indian farmers and ranchers across the country, and get to do work for that organization from home, kind of driving some of the creativity of what we do on our place, because I feel like you can walk the walk, or you can talk the talk, but if you're not walking the walk, then why do you have the microphone? So I try to always explore some of the things that we're recommending on our ranch. I try out the programs first before we help producers get enrolled and enlisted. And I would say probably my contribution to our operation has been diversifying some of our income streams through our value-added beef production business, DX Beef. A little bit of background about what we're producing on. Like I said, northern mixed grass prairie. Based on some of what they've explained they've had to deal with, it's paradise. So you guys should come visit me, probably not them, it sounds like. On our ranch, we have 7 households. My dad's siblings and myself. There were 3 generations living on it until recently, a few years ago, when my grandmother passed. I guess technically in September, there will again be 3 generations living on the place. And that's really important to us because we are a family-first operation, and we really prioritize finding ways to always have the family feel welcome. And our family extends beyond the people that live there or the people that we share a last name with. It's the community around us too. Some of the things that we've implemented that have been really transformative for us to help with some of that family first desire is we've tried to start to mimic nature a little better and doing things in harmony with nature and learning from her and working alongside of her instead of just what would commonly be expected in the industry. So we're proud May calvers. weaning at 10 months age. We're allowing cattle to exist in a way that's a little more comparable to how the bison did on the landscape when they were helping the ecosystem to evolve. We are also trying to figure out ways that we can close some of the gaps that exist in our food system. The Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation, like many of our communities, probably is one of many USDA-defined food deserts, yet there's 80,000 head of cattle that function within those two counties, so it doesn't make sense that we don't have access to local foods. So we bit the bullet in 2019 and we started a direct-to-consumer beef business. We scaled that up to, we were moving about 12 head per month just within our local markets last year. And then we realized that the family relationships were starting to falter again, having to run that much beef around. So we've scaled it back to a little more manageable level. But what that has allowed for us is given us a chance to reconnect with the community again and to have that story of why we're making local beef available be even more meaningful, because it's now a teachable component of what we have to offer. We're able to correlate those dung beetles to how good their burger tasted last night at the local restaurant, and we're able to get people out onto the land and experiencing what I took for granted up until I went to college 5 hours away and had to learn that that was exactly what I wanted to do for the rest of my career. So I think I'll end there, and I'll pass it back for our first question. And I noticed there wasn't a picture of a dung beetle on anybody's slideshow yet this morning, so that's why my hand's covered in poo in the corner up there.
So really different types of operations, right? Very different, and different life experiences. So one of the questions I'd like to ask you, and again, when you're ready to ask, it's John Locke, Katie Scarborough, Emery Birdwell, and Kelsey Ducheneau-Scott. What do you know now? What do you know now that had you known in the beginning of your career or somewhere in the middle of your career that might have saved you a lot of heartache, expense, time? Who wants to go first?
All right, I'm going to get a little bit deep. Maybe I'm not the best one to go first, but probably the biggest thing that I would say, if I had known, I was in a real search for the enterprise, for the tweaks, for the silver bullets, to help tune things up so that I could make more money, so that everything else would get better. And what I've learned throughout the years is that if I find purpose in my life and translate that into the purpose of the business, then everything else comes after that. I think a lot of times we have a habit of saying that, well, our purpose is to feed the world. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's good for the environment, and it's just a good feeling thing to be involved with groups like this and to raise cattle and be a part of nature. And I think that we need to get specific about why we're doing what we're doing. And if you do that and you wake up every day and you work towards fulfilling that purpose, then everything else will follow.
I had a production answer to that. From my context, having been a couple different places, whenever I would go into a new place, it was always something that had a problem, like either I was hired or it was consulting something, and it was usually a degraded ecosystem. And so the return on that working capital was dependent on how quickly we could maybe reverse some of those issues with regenerative practices and have a cash flowing operation and see a return. And one thing that I was always worried about doing, and so that begs the question of what class, type of animal, enterprise mix, those sort of things. And one thing that I always found myself nervous about doing was scale too fast, like growth too fast kills a business. And I think one thing that I've learned is if you buy the appropriate class value of animal, which in my context would be an undervalued yearling from somewhere, and you have those skill sets, you can impact that land so much more quickly by rapidly increasing numbers. And again, if you bought the correct animal, you can liquidate them nearly whenever necessary, or you put in the correct risk management strategies. So again, I think my take home or my takeaway is to create that cash flow, to get that generating more quickly. Yes, it takes money to make money. You're going to have to buy some more animals. That is what I'm recommending. But again, buying the right class of animal that allows you to exit when necessary, but allows you to have the impact to make the system begin functioning much more quickly, much more rapidly, rather than sometimes we see these periods where an investor is involved for 5, 10 years maybe, and they're still just pouring money into something. And maybe you're increasing, your harvestable amount every 10 years or 10% every year, but you're understocked ultimately. And so again, I think that's one thing. Really consider some unconventional options to get the impact that's necessary on your landscape, to change your landscape in a rapid enough manner to where it's going to affect your cash and ultimately your investor, your own wallet, whatever it may be.
I'll go back to the very beginning. When I started out, there was no one else but me in my area doing what I was fixed to do. And when I saw Savory had an ad in West Texas Livestock Weekly that you could double the size of your ranch by going into the Savory grazing. Well, when you went to the school, the first thing he told you is you cannot double this the first week, the first year, maybe for 5 or 6 years, until you increase the amount of grass or forage you're growing on your ground. Somewhere or another, I forgot that. Within the first year, it rained the first year, and I doubled up before, really fast. It didn't rain again for years. And during that period of time, most of the people that I went to school with quit. And I came close more than once, but I didn't quit, and I kept going. The thing about it was, back in those days, there weren't any people like y'all. There wasn't anybody else. I was the only one out there, and I was hiding. I didn't want anybody else knowing what I was doing because I was running it on leased land, and if they found out how many cattle I was running there, somebody else would get it. So the biggest mistake I've made was running too many cattle too quick, and I was swung too many fences, and I guess that's, if you're going to be in the yearling business, maybe that's the tendency, or all of us have, but I haven't got over it. I'm still swinging at the fences.
Well, mine was a lot more about people. So I'll add to, with a total curveball here. For me, if I could go back to the girl who moved home fresh out of college, I wish I could tell her that it's really helpful to indulge in vulnerability about what you don't know and about what you'd like to know more about. And it's okay to not take everybody's input as a fact, and to really challenge those and to start to interpret them more so as their informed opinion, and to start to think a little bit more about how that recommendation or input plays out to you in your own context. There's a lot of new ideas I wanted to bring home to the ranch, or thought that I wanted to bring home to the ranch, and there were several times where me and my dad sitting around enjoying a cold beverage were just going back and forth about what we thought we should do differently, and he was like, well, no, that's not it, and I was sure that I was right because I read about it in a book somewhere. And 5 years later, like, yeah, he supported me in implementing the change, and 5 years later, I'm like, yeah, we don't do that anymore because that was stupid. That does not fit in our operation. Like, context is very much key. And the only way that you can really inform yourself about what your context is and what makes sense to apply to your individual operation is to be vulnerable in that space and to find people that you can safely form your own opinions and informed plan of action with.
If I could add on to that just a little bit, that was the second thing I was going to say was people. As humans, we're meant to work together, and there's a pretty good chance that whatever you're trying to build, you can't do it alone, or you shouldn't do it alone. And I know we're really talented and tough and all of that stuff, but if I would have figured out how to build a team and how to manage people and just embrace that, how often do you hear, well, we didn't get in the cattle business because we like dealing with people, so we want to be out with the cattle, right? Well, I think we need to get over that, because as humans, we are supposed to build communities and we're supposed to work together.
So now, questions from you? You can direct them to one person, you can direct them to the group.
There's one right here, Russ.
Oh, there's
Oh, there's here.
Oh, excuse me. Question is for Emery. Have you been in a movie? And if so, what is the name of that movie? And how would we find that movie? What would we Google?
No, I have not been in a movie, no.
You want me to let Deborah answer that?
Well, you've been in some videos.
I have been in some videos, yes.
What's the name of the video?
Do you know the name?
I forgot.
Herd Impact.
What?
Herd Impact.
Herd Impact, yeah.
Who else has a question? Right here.
I don't have an opinion on this yet, but I was just wondering, I've heard a lot lately about the Cattle Price Discovery Act, and I wondered what you guys felt about it, or if you guys had any opinions about it. That's it.
Did you hear? Cattle Price Discovery Act. Do you have any opinions on it yet?
No. No, I don't.
I have pretty mixed opinions. I'll make a generalized comment maybe. So I think that there's a need for broader and more available information for producers to make more informed decisions, but I'm not exactly pro the method of that has been proposed, because I feel like it's a violation of some of my rights. But anyways.
I will say this, is once you get the government involved in this, we're going the wrong direction.
That's, yes.
And I produce on a lot different scale than these guys. So the price that is most impactful for me is what's going to come at the Faith Livestock Auction when I take calves across the scale. So I think that that's just to show the scope and the diversity in which legislation can impact directly or less directly, or just like really understanding and digging deeper into knowing all of the mechanisms within which cattle are sold in the industry, and all of the ways in which we don't really have a whole lot of control over the price that we're getting for our product on the different scales, and what that looks like across the spectrum, I think is really important. And I think that that is information that we should try to inform the consumer about, just so that they're a little more aware of what producers endure, really, because I think a lot of times it is just endure. But, you know, I'm not producing at the scale of 8,000 animals to sell. So I think that, again, it comes back to that context is key. And I think that the more we can all be informed in this space and help to tell our story through those different lenses, it's helpful in the grand scheme of things.
Question right here.
This question is for Kelsey. What steps did you take to create a direct-to-consumer program?
Where to start? Well, first I started bootlegging beef, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing. It's not very clear in South Dakota anyway to figure out what steps come first in order to establish a business to sell beef legally. So for a good probably 6 months, I mean, I didn't realize that what I was doing wasn't completely kosher. And then I got a call from the Animal Industry Board, and they started asking me some questions. And I wish then that I just would have asked them questions back. And so that's what I would say is contact whatever regulatory agency within your state or your jurisdiction would have some of the answers and ask them. Because, and they may have there are some states that have great resources out there online that I now know about, and they don't always apply across state line because of the different laws that apply within your state, but they're a good place to get started. And whatever answers you can't gather through that, I would call the Animal Industry Board or the State Meat Inspector Association or whatever you have, and really ask the questions and let them know that, hey, this is something I'm thinking about doing. I don't know, there's no how-to guide online. I want to make sure that we're in good standing, and they'll give you the answers. But I went for a solid 2 months scared to ask questions because, one, I was already doing it wrong. But two, I didn't know you could ask those questions. And that's what they're there for. A lot of word of mouth. I utilize some resources like Barn to Door to get my product online. I buttered up a few butchers to please, could you please just try this? I know it sounds crazy, but it just came from that space of being willing to give it a try, to start small, identify a market to sell to first before you go scaling up too large and you have too much perishable product to be able to sell. I'd be happy to connect with you offline too.
We had a question right here.
Where?
I can just shout it if that's all right.
I think
No, let's get the mic so we get it.
Thanks.
So I was dumb enough to try to build my own federally inspected meat plant in the middle of my operation and try to grass-fed finish, and we're in the middle of that now. We've done it, but I think when you're thinking about the grass-fed supply chain for a lot of producers out here, it's a ton of cow-calf guys, big opportunities in backgrounding, but I think the really challenging part of the supply chain is finishing, right? It's to do that strictly regeneratively on grass without supplement, and then feed that supply chain every week, year-round, right? So I'm just curious as to y'all's wisdom and perspective on trying to solve that super important part of the supply chain to grow this niche and create more opportunities for producers and direct marketers. What y'all think about, kind of the genetics or any opportunities in the grass finishing space on the horizon?
So, so in Texas, I did beef a little bit, and we ended up ultimately it was a poorly, anyways, the ground had been conventionally managed for a period of time, and we weren't going to be able to grass finish, and so we grain finished beef. And I really kind of started visiting with a bunch of people about that issue. And what you start getting into is the finishing phase is the issue, and that's also the heaviest phase. So you have freight working against you in basically every way possible, because you're probably going to finish them somewhere, then you're probably going to kill them somewhere, and then you have your distribution issue. And one thing, I was actually visiting with a gentleman here recently in Nebraska. One thing that I find really interesting is, what if we could somehow centralize, find that line between where's the predominated warm season forage base and where's the predominated cool season forage base? And basically understand, okay, could we collect enough people together, put a plant essentially in the middle, and maybe solve some of this calendar year issue? Because even when you have a warm season base, you can still usually graze a lot of those places and finish cattle even in the winter months. And realistically, once you get past that line, which is maybe somewhere mid-Nebraska straight south, and I'm talking more of a central corridor to the United States, because in the West, to do it to scale, again, the issues you're going to run into is federal land and all those things surrounding that. And then again, when you get north, those grasses are amazing to finish animals on, but basically for about 3 months most. So again, where can we kind of draw that line maybe and then centralize that slaughter and then decide, okay, how does this make the most sense to coordinate this? And maybe if your best gains and your most efficient finishing or most efficient growing is going to be on more of those cool season bases, maybe you put some of those animals to the north and then cooperate to go south a little bit to finish them, all again within the vicinity of that centralized location, because you got to manage the freight, and that's only going to get worse. We all know that. So.
Well, I guess one of the things that we do, I mean, we're birthed to butcher at our place. We don't butcher on our place, but the animals that we're processing spend their whole life. But in order for us to do that, we have had to break out of the idea of what the backgrounding phase is and what the finishing phase is, and we've had to redefine that to match our animals that have evolved within that ecosystem to know what gain they have to be able to maintain in order to have a good quality product still. And we've diversified what it is that we're processing. We're not solely processing a 2 to 3 year old carcass. Like we're also processing older animals that make awesome burger that's actually more nutrient dense because it's had longer time gaining and assuming all of those minerals into their meat profile. And so I just think that there's a lot of instances in which we're having these regenerative conversations, or we're wanting our food system to be regenerative, but we're sometimes trying to apply the conventional ideologies behind what sizes or metrics have to be met in order for us to do it. So I don't have an answer to it. I just think that there are some of those norms that we'll have to continue to challenge, and we'll have to try to interpret more through that lens of nature to understand how to make it work as we regenerate our food system.
And I think too, maybe to piggyback on your question, maybe some of the issue that we run into is the length of investment, capital investment, before we see a return, and how hard that is for some individuals. I've worked with some people where the suggestion has been, okay, what if you did 10%? So you were cash flowing yourself a little bit. What if you only went all the way through with 10%? Could you do 50%? What is your cash flow need essentially before that beef is going to turn back around? So just to add that as far as the opposite, to float yourself long enough. So, and money's only getting more expensive. So.
Other questions?
So this is going to be kind of a different question, but I've spoke to a couple other younger producers through our career, and a younger producer, like some people that are here, are coming, learning new things, or read a book or an article or watch something, listen to new strategy, and they apply that, and it is a disaster. And I guess my question for all of you is, would each of you be willing to share a snidbit or a clip of a disaster that you went through and what you learned from that for us to put in our notes to try to save us from the same disaster? How much time do you have? Just 5 minutes? Yeah, I don't know. I could probably name 10 of them. One of the biggest mistakes I made early on was switching to the low input model and forgetting about you can't starve profit into a business. And turning, I tell the story often, turning a big set of bulls from a $7,000 set of bulls into a $3,500 set of bulls and saving $600 worth of feed. What did the margins look like on that? It was pretty rough. So probably to answer that, put that in perspective, is the biggest mistakes I've made are from not looking at things holistically, not looking at the entire picture, getting fixated and thinking, well, if I can just do this and get to this point, everything else will be okay, and all these other things I'm struggling with will fall into place. You know, with grazing, if I can just graze this many cows, the numbers look good and I'll be great. And then not taking into account the impact on quality of life of having to manage that intensively.
I think I'd give kind of a couple comments on that. There we go. From a personality or maybe a personality type or a personal perspective, I know especially as a young person, there's a lot of that drive to like get ahead. Let's make a crunch. Like, okay, we're gonna make this change. I know this is gonna be really hard for us for the next 3 to 6 months, but it's okay because after this period of time, we're gonna lay off. We're gonna change things. We're gonna balance our lifestyle. We're gonna go somewhere for a month. I think, my husband's right there. I think that is me every single, I have done that so many times. And I got this advice one time. I was visiting with a friend about, I just don't feel like I'm living this balanced lifestyle because there's always another goal. There's always another, what do they call it now? A hack, a cheat, a get ahead, you know? And again, it's not that we shouldn't hustle, but she had this really good advice. She said, you know, it's okay to have these periods of time in your life where you really buckle down, but you can't sprint forever. So she always talks about, like, you can have a sprint for a short season, and then you need to jog. But you need to have a solid, and this is, I'm preaching to myself here, you gotta have a boundary, and maybe commit that to someone else, but once I achieve X, and for me it's to quantify it, this many dollars, this much return, this many increased AUDs, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna live my life in balance, I'm gonna reap that reward, and then I'm gonna move on, or it's not worth it. I mean, that's my big thing that I've really struggled with in my career, is truly living in balance, because we can fool ourselves really easily for short periods of time. So I think that would be my answer. I know that's not operationally specific, but.
It's amazing. I was sitting here thinking about what I was going to say. It may not be as clear as how she said it, but when I was younger, I was going really fast. I had 3 ranches in Texas and a ranch in New Mexico. I could see 3 of those ranches in Texas and be in New Mexico 24 hours later. I didn't make any money doing it, but I lied to myself, and every time I'd do one of these analysis on where we was at, I would lie to myself and tell me I can make it work the next time. I didn't, and a lot of things fell apart. Eventually you slow down because you can't go that fast anymore. So but what I'm trying to say is, when you start looking at these deals and it doesn't work on paper, it's not going to work because you want it to.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback. I think that what would be really helpful is to identify what your definition of success is, like tonight. Like just to journal it, what does success mean leaving here? And then reflect on that over the next couple of weeks, months, years, however long you decide that that's what your idea of success is gonna stay. But I jumped into, the neighbors were talking about 600-pound calves come October, and they were talking about this many vaccinations, and so I was like, okay, well, this is the pay-to-play game, right? So this is what you got to do, and none of that is how I define success in our operation. Like, I like that I have a 7-year-old nephew who I can trust to go tag calves because our cows are gentle. Like, I like that as success. And none of my neighbors would have probably helped me come to that idea of what I should be striving for. And you can get to burnout really quickly if you're not even striving towards your own success.
So you've talked about those kinds of that may not have been quite the answer you were looking for, but it's very interesting that all four of these people, these producers, came up with a very personal answer to that. Not that it's another new grazing system or another new gimmick or another new piece of equipment, but it was something in here. So what I want to ask you is, what stirs you? What fills your soul? What lights your light? Why do you do what you do?
I'm getting the look. What stirs me, this is going to sound a little bit corny, is the opportunity to be a little bit better tomorrow than I was today, and to use that and what I've learned from that to try to help other people do the same thing. And that's kind of what I've, so I'll go a little bit deeper. I'm a little bit different than a lot of you guys in that I kind of inherited a business. I inherited somebody else's purpose, and it was very clear way back in the day when our business was started. There was a need for it, and it fit, environments all over the world. And throughout the years, that gets lost a little bit. And whenever you inherit that and you come into it, it's hard to figure out how you personally line up with that. And that's why I said what I did in my intro about problem solving. And to me, it's not about ranching, it's not about grazing, it's not about all the details, it's about a better life. And that takes change. And we're all capable of changing, but there's so many barriers to change and so many paradigms that we have that keep us from changing. And so I'm just eaten up with challenging myself to change and be better, and then to help other people figure out how to do the same thing.
I think I'm going to answer this question by potentially merging the past question and Deborah's prompt. One thing that we've done here recently is created a holistic, if you will, decision matrix for some big life decisions that we have coming up. But basically every deal or decision or choice that we have personally or as a family or with the business goes through this matrix. And I think it answers the question, should I be doing what I'm going to do, or should I do this? But we were too broad. Like, we had family mission statement, family vision, and it was so broad. And I'm very type A, and we wanted categories. So we made 5 categories. We made faith, family, philanthropy, health and wellness, family and friends. I should add friends in there. And professional, in that order. Like, professional was at the bottom of the matrix. And I think any decision that you're going to make professionally, it's got to fulfill all those other categories in that order first before it can be considered in your professional life. And so, to answer in Deborah's question, like, if it doesn't go through the matrix, if it's not a yes, we do have some question marks. We've gone a little gray. We allow question marks every once in a while now. But if it doesn't go through there, therefore it doesn't stir me, therefore I'm not going to do it. And that's ultimately what we've had to come down to.
I don't know why they put me between 2 girls, so women. She just went over my head. But years ago, even when I was failing and not being as successful as I wanted to be, I could see what I was doing was starting to be right at times, and that we were making a difference and moving forwards. In 2011, we finally, it was probably the worst year in all of our lives in Texas and a lot of other places. It was during the drought of 11 to 14. But in 2011, we went a different direction and threw everything into one gate, and they all went together. And from that point in time on, we started making a difference. And I think from 11 till now has made all those other problems worthwhile, and we're starting to see our land improve. We're starting to be able to show other people how to do it, and that's what's made it worth it to us.
Anybody up north knows how good the first chirp of a meadowlark sounds in the spring when they've returned. And when, you get to see the calf beller to their mom, and their mom picks their head up from grazing and bellers back, and then they go find each other. And it's magic. It's like more magical than any Disney cartoon. Those instances that we get to experience on the landscape are what I think truly speaks to my soul. It lights up my brain in a way with excitement that I can't quite explain. And it's just nature doing it. I mean, we all have genetic DNA that is that connected to nature, that only nature can get us excited in that way. And what I really think stirs me in this work that I do is I get to be a segment in a continuum of making sure the next generation gets to hear that. And it works out really well that on this picture, there's a young lady kneeling with me there, and she's got a long braid and a baseball cap on and a blue shirt. And I was teaching her about a plant called yarrow. It's everywhere. Like, you can find it everywhere. And I was telling her about all the medicinal uses for yarrow one time, and she came with us to a branding, and somebody had burned their skin, and one of the benefits with yarrow is you can throw the leaf in your mouth and kind of make a paste out of it, and it calms irritation and burns. And before I could say anything to the individual who'd touched the iron and gotten burned, she was like, "Hold on, I'll go get some yarrow." And she went running out the branding pen, and she'd come back, and it didn't even resonate with her that maybe this individual didn't want her chewing up a wad of yarrow and spitting it on their arm. But I just like to know that I got to be a part in helping her know that knowledge that she's going to pass on to her children one day and to her nieces and nephews. That's pretty cool. And it's nice to see all of the diversity in the age here, because I know that we're all doing that. We're all excited by that.
Just to piggyback on that and to clarify, tie what I was trying to say earlier back to ranching, anytime I bring on a intern or a new employee, I tell them, I hope you see that what we're trying to do here is an experiment in a better way to ranch. And it feels like a lot of the practices and stuff that we see in the industry, the conventional stuff, is a bit antiquated, and it worked in a day, and it's just not working anymore. But being able to do that in a way that works with nature and stirs that part of us that's so connected to nature, that just gets me all kinds of pumped up.
I've got a question.
Okay.
Can I go? Okay, so I would like to know about when change happened. What put you at a time and place that you were receptive to change? That's the first part of the question, being receptive. And then secondly, what convinced you to proceed with changing something? Was it by seeing? Was it by hearing? Was it by what enabled you to find the confidence to change once you knew you might need to do so? So it's a two-pronged question. I hope I've made myself clear. Sorry.
Okay. I think one thing, it's kind of hard to find the words to maybe describe it appropriately, but when you're in systems like in a grazing system, or we deal with water a lot, I would almost maybe define it maybe rather than a sense, a feeling of energy. If I am out in a landscape trying to force something that I think that I've interpreted from the landscape that I'm then going to force, and I'm trying to alter something, and if I find myself, it's whatever I'm doing, putting wire a certain way, moving water a certain way, handling cattle a certain way, if it's this major energy suck or drag, even if I think that that's what I've interpreted, like this is what nature has told me I need to do, therefore I'm going to force this to happen, and I'm revisiting that over and over, it's just wrong. Just stop what you're doing. If it's just draining and you're feeling the need to force, you're already outside the train of thought that you should be in. So I think the first signal for that with me is maybe frustration with the situation. If it's just not naturally flowing, whatever change I'm trying to implement, it's not the right one.
I don't, honestly, this is going to sound a little harsh. I don't think anybody ever changes until they have to, at least the first time. And that was where we came from. I mean, our back was against the wall, and we had to make a change, or it was just going to be miserable. And there was some misery after the changes, too. I don't know why, but I believe in what Katie's saying with the energy and the positive energy, and then once you feel it. But it almost gets, once your back gets pushed against that wall and you take that first step and then you learn something from it. Maybe it's what not to do again. Once you experience that pain, if you get yourself to a point to where you say, okay, well, how can I skip getting in such a bind, right? Because change is actually really easy. It's all the steps that push you to where you have to change that's the hard part. So if you can fast forward that process and think about the consequences of not changing and how much worse things are going to be 10 years from now if you don't do something different. And for me, it's just been probably the last 8 or 10 years, it's been a constant thing, and it's gotten so much easier after you take that first big step to, okay, well, what can we change? Let's do something, even if it's wrong. And I don't know, it's just, I wish that people wouldn't have to get to that point to where they get pushed up against the wall, but maybe that's the only solution for some people.
Well, lately for me, it's been saving the space to actually reflect on how does that make you feel? Like, how does that actually make you feel? The decision that you just made, or the action that you're going to have to take, how does it make you feel? And I'm struggling to identify an exact example to offer you in a moment in which I decided to make change, but I've noticed lately in thinking more about, well, how would that make me feel if this is what we decided to do instead? It has shifted if I decide to take that action or not, because it is kind of that gut check that gives you a chance to step away from what you've allowed to be the norm, or what your reality has formed as the norm for you to do. And it gives you the space to kind of challenge it a little bit further and to redesign it, if you will. And I think that having a good support system and people that you can call on to help you ask that question to yourself once in a while is really, really invaluable, especially in the space that we're all trying to exist. And having that network, whether that be in a spouse or a friend or a mentor that you can call and you can say, hey, I just need to throw this at you. Can you help me think through this a little bit? That can be really, really transformative.
Just a little side note. I was listening to a podcast and heard something not too long ago I thought was very interesting. The guy, and I don't remember who it was, he said, if you really need a change, if you need to change and you're struggling, initiate some sort of a physiological change in your life. And then your mind will start to change as you start walking, start running, start doing exercise, do some sort of physiological change, and then the mental change, getting yourself in that space will come much easier.
Emery, how receptive to change are you?
That's why she's sitting over here and he's sitting over there.
I don't even know what the question was, and they got away over my head. But why did you hand me this?
Why did you change in 2011?
Should I let him off the hook?
Well, we didn't have any other. We had to change in 2011 or go under is what ends up happening. And we were out of water, we were out of grass, but we had part of the cattle contracted, and they were contracted out in front of us. We couldn't deliver them, so we had to find some way to do it, and that's where Savory came back into the play. And he's in his old, well, I remembered and amazing how many times in the past I'd gone back and remembered something he had said, and that somewhere or another I'd forgotten before. And he said, when you get in a bad drought, you throw them all together. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about things. So when I finally thought of that, we did it. And we sold a third of the herd and kept the other two. And it gave us a little more rest. We were able to combine our water sources. we started laying pipelines. We was virtually laying pipelines as the cattle were coming over the hill behind us. There would be, one day we was laying pipelines, there was a fire coming over one hill and the cattle were coming over the other. And the fire stopped and the cattle kept coming, and we just barely got the water there for them. But it was just things, mainly, probably I'd like to say this, and I've said it more than once, most of what I got right in my life has been accidentally, and that's kind of 2011 forced into a lot of things to get right or go under.
So I have like 3 questions, but they're super simple. So pick one that you want to answer. What's your, for your own operations, you guys have talked at a lot of really great levels, but like drill it down to home. What's either your biggest challenge coming up, like in the real near future, your biggest opportunity, or like your best work smarter, not harder kind of moment that, so any one of those, a challenge, opportunity, or just one tangible decision that you've made that just really, really made things easier?
The biggest challenge I see is that the way people do business has changed for us. We used to travel the country and travel the world and visit people and sit at their kitchen table, and they used to get to know us, and then they would do business with us because they trusted us. We spent a lot of money doing that kind of stuff. And these days, all you need is a Facebook account to get to know someone. That could be an opportunity as well. The biggest opportunity I see is sort of a generational transfer of wealth and a changeover in properties. Everyone always says you can't find good help and you can't find places to lease. And I put out a deal for help this spring, and I had 4 just amazing candidates and hired one of them. And I think people are going back to purpose, and they're going back to stuff, meaningful work. And with the change comes bad stuff, but with the changes comes good stuff. And things are changing very fast right now. So I think the opportunities are going to be plentiful, and the challenges will be plentiful as well.
The opportunity that I'm most excited about is accessing deeper into our soil. Really building in, putting that soil health up there as priority 1 in the decisions that we're making and how we're grazing. Because right now, we got to see a beautiful soil pit the other day, and to hear Deborah and Emery talk about the ways that they've been able to deepen their access to the resources underneath their feet through their grazing practices, and how that's resulted in some pastures in a trifold increase in their production. That's really inspirational to know all that they're doing. And I look forward to continuing to build on that on our ranch and to work with those livestock underground by managing our livestock above ground even more intentionally.
So I think one of our biggest challenges we have this year, I hire seasonal help every single year, and boy, do I have some hiring stories for you, because there are people that just kind of come through every few months, and typically, we end up with guys. A lot of that area, people are still in, up in teepees, and if they're not, they have a bedroll on a truck bed, and they're living the life with 5 dogs and a string of horses. So I decided to kind of change that this past year, and I didn't hire a single person over the age of 25 to run this large acreage operation. And one of the people I actually hired, she's hired as an intern. She was a special ed teacher in Alabama. So it's been really interesting. And the reason I decided to hire those people and change kind of my hiring paradigm, if you will, I decided I'm not going to hire someone based on their skill set, even though we're in a highly intensive skill area. I mean, if you make a mistake where we're at, you could die. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. And it has been one of the best opportunities, oddly enough. Actually, this answer the second question there. They have challenged so many boxes, paradigms, norms that I didn't even realize that I was in by asking questions that my immediate response was, that was very simplistic. And then I would think about it, and it's like, actually, it's a pretty profound question that you just asked me. And they were asking questions they didn't even realize that they were asking or the thought they were prompting. And so it's a huge challenge in that, okay, if we have a runaway with 2,000 head of cattle, they're probably not going to get them stopped. But at the same time, they're probably optimizing and improving so many of my operations and saving me so much money in other places by asking these questions and needing so much time input and really making me question myself, that it's actually turned into this huge opportunity. And the third part of that question, one thing I'm most excited about, we're working on a project right now, a pilot project with the Forest Service, and essentially we're combining 3 permits together, nearly 30,000 acres of forest into one operation, and trying to run one herd up there to do that. And we're actually in the middle of this whole writing process. You've got to get it federally approved, NEPA, the whole 9 yards. And I'm working on writing it right now. And I mean, this young woman, intern, is just picking it apart, like everything that I've written. And it's making me question, okay, why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? And I think it's going to be one of the best opportunities for us to really get this right. And, you know, if we fundamentally can alter how these federal grounds are going to be used, we're hopefully going to take it to the state of Wyoming. I'm really excited about it. And she, again, is questioning maybe even further than I am, because she's asking a simple question, well, why would you put salt there? And then I go to explain it to her, and I'm like, well, no, we shouldn't do that. That's, you know, part of what we're trying to change here. And these deeper questions of where are we moving impact? How are we moving the nutrients in these hillsides? How are we doing this water? What is this going to look like for my cash flow and marketing windows? All these things, she's prompting a lot of that. So our biggest challenge, our biggest opportunity, and one of the things I'm most excited about is the people that we've brought in this year in all 3 questions.
Coming.
It's amazing everybody else has solved their labor problems. We haven't. We do have a chance with our son-in-law and daughter coming back to the ranch, and this is kind of a joke and kind of not, but if she don't work out, we're going to find him another wife. And
that's his daughter, not daughter-in-law.
He is really a good hand, and so we got a chance there. As far as the other challenges, the expenses and the way things are going right now, it's going to be some refiguring before it's over with for us. Our fuel bills and our feed bills, we don't know where this drought is going, and it's coming. It keeps getting a little bit closer. We're still, some of you there and saw that it's still pretty good there, and a lot of that's due to our management in the past 18 years, but I don't know how long that's going to hold on. So we got a lot of things to think about, and I don't have many answers.
Are there any opportunities out there?
I don't think I'll say that.
Yes, I just was curious if you had noticed any changes in your infiltration rates as you start doing more regenerative grazing practices.
Like 6 years ago, I was driving out in the Ranger with a hired hand of ours, and we were like half-inch of rain had fallen overnight, and there was a creek that was just flowing with water, and he made the comment to me of, look at all that water, that's great. And I stopped dead in my tracks, and I'm like, no, it's not. We haven't got that much rain. It should be sinking in. And the pasture that we were in was what my grandpa named the calving pasture. And so what did we do in it every year? We calved in it. Even though we had shifted our calving period by 30 days, we still had cows in there. And so while there had been a slight shift, there was a historical use of that pasture at the same time every year. And there's a visible difference at the time between the plant community above ground in that pasture and the others. And so the next season we gave it a complete rest. And I went and we had some Band-Aids that we tried to apply. I mean, we put some old hay bales in the creek to slow the water flow down and things like that. But this spring we've had some tremendous rains. Oddly enough, our cows are in the calving pasture while we're calving this year, but that's not because that's the only place they've been. It's just the time for them to be in that pasture, and we haven't seen that happen. So as far as me having numbers from an infiltration test to compare for you, I don't on that particular, but visibly, and I can observe and see that change happening in such a short amount of time, and that's really exciting. And yeah, we're looking forward to actually taking some infiltration tests this summer. We gave up on it last summer because we were so depressed about the drought anyway, but it has a direct correlation, and you can see the sponge soak up that water and how over a longer period of time you're benefiting from those rainfalls as they come through.
One of our biggest limiting factors is soil structure, and we have a pretty tightly packed sandy clay loam soil. We've seen a marginal increase in infiltration rate, but what has been massive is just rainfall effectiveness. And I think a lot of people discount that. When you look at the set stock places now that are in drought and they get a little rain, not much happens there, and a little bit of rain goes a long way in our system.
In 2000, I keep going back to 2011, but in 2011, between October and the middle of the summer, we'd had 7 inches. And it was pretty sad, as we all know. This year, we've had 7 inches since October. Last winter, we worked diligently to put the grass back on the ground. We do that every winter. We put it back on the ground. We got the litter back on the ground. A lot of y'all saw what the grass looks like, but it's still, we're going to make it to the shipping date. But what we're finding the absorption of water is so good, we're not running water anymore, but the water is soaking into the hills and running back in underground and coming up under our tanks. And our tanks are staying full. For a while, I kept wondering why the tank's not getting any lower, and it hadn't rained, but it finally dawned on us that this water's coming up. So yes, we are starting to gather that water in the litter, and the litter and the herd impact is so important to make these things work. And that's the best thing I can tell you to do, is to work on your litter, and the impact and rest are the most 2 important parts of this.
Doesn't really rain where I live, and we ranch on rocks, but the meadows, when we flood irrigate, it's actually kind of interesting. So we kind of want to manage our sponge a little bit different, because we want to keep the water table at a certain elevation. So we do what's called pulse irrigating now. Rather than turning it into a duck pond, we just flash with water. And before, this was wild. We would drain a field so that we could put cattle in. I would quite literally have to turn off water for almost a week to a week and a half before I could put cattle in there. And I mean, it's this much water on the ground. We've now gotten it down to where it will pretty well in a day and a half to 2 days, which I know does not sound like a great infiltration rate, but it's rapidly improved. And again, it's kind of an opposite, because we're butting up to that water table constantly, and we want to keep it elevated so that we can flash water across a field pretty fast. I mean, we push water miles through those canals. So it's a little bit opposite. We want the sponge to kind of stay full, but not completely. And we have found too, I guess I'll add on to that, we get what's called floating turf or sod. It quite literally looks like an animation sometimes when you walk across the fields. The turf will go like this. It just floats. And so we've had to, in certain places, basically make drains to pull the water because we're in these narrow valleys and the water can't go far enough or down because it's on top of granite. I mean, we're on a mountain. So it's pretty interesting, actually, that we do want some of it to go in, but honestly, some of it we just have to drain away or you will float. I mean, you can be trotting along and your whole horse and you are just swallowed up by the earth, like gone. I mean, it's that much water down there on top of the rocks. So
Sounds beautiful, though.
it's gorgeous.
Any last minute question out there? We're coming to the close. We do have one? Okay.
So we're living in an age that we're just inundated with information. If y'all could recommend, one resource, whether it's a book, a school, a course, whatever, that anybody in here could gain something really valuable to take back home, what would that be?
Mine would be Cattle Facts. I live by Cattle Facts. And it's probably one of the most reliable centralized sources you can get, but they do a weekly report. And I think everyone, even if you may say, oh, well, I sell beef, you still have cull cows. And Cattle Facts religiously, I read their news every morning and every afternoon. And then their Friday reports. If you had to pick one thing from them, it would be the Friday report every week.
As far as books, I really like Knowledge Rich Ranching by Alan Nation. I think is a great read. And I'm absolutely biased in this, but I recommend everyone go to the Ranching for Profit School. I quite often hear people say, well, I'm already doing all the Ranching for Profit stuff, but I haven't been to the school. And that tells me really quick that you really don't know what the Ranching for Profit School is about. It's not a place to go to tell you to calve in May and don't bale hay and run stockers or custom graze or whatever. So I can't recommend that enough. You'll get a return on your investment if you do that.
I just would recommend whatever personal development opportunity that you can find to continue to enhance your own communication skills, because that's going to benefit you so many times over as you continue to navigate learning. I did Ranching for Profit in January, and it was a tremendous experience. And then recently I listened to a book called How to Do the Work, and I'm like, man, I wish I would have listened to this before I went to Ranching for Profit. I probably wouldn't have been in my own way so much. So a lot of it comes back to the arguments you have with yourself and between your ears, and just spending the time reflecting and doing the work that you need to be able to do a better job of communicating with those around you. And there's all sorts of really great free resources that can help you do that online.
Last week we had HMI had a course, 2-day course at our place. I would look them up, and I would look like they were talking about Ranching for Profit. I would go back to Ranching for Profit. I've been to both of them, and if Alan Savory is out there again, I'd go back to him. I don't know what Savory's got something else going on somewhere. I don't know what it's like anymore.
And we have Alan Williams coming to the ranch next week as well, right? Sorry? I think we're full. But thank you for asking. All right, we are at the end of this panel. I want to thank each one of you. Thank you very much for sharing with us. And I want to thank you in the audience for asking your questions and for listening to it. I bet they'll be around here if you have something more personal or something you want them to elaborate on. But for now, Russ, is somebody Pete, there he is. Okay, going to come up here and thank you very much for this time.